Welcome everyone to the second of NOAA's webinar series. Tonight we are going to deal with stares, smirks, and shoutouts. Our presenter this evening is Kelsey Thompson. Kelsey is a person with albinism who has been a NOAA member since its foundation and has attended a whole bunch of NOAA conferences. Kelsey currently serves as the secretary of NOAA. She is the immediate past chair of the board of directors. She has worked on, she is currently the editorial committee chairperson and scholarship committee co-chair. She has served on many aspects of NOAA. She has served on the board since 2005 and also been involved with the Board of Scientific Advisors. As editor of Albinism Insight and NOAA News from 2000 to 2008, Kelsey helped to establish a regular publication schedule and organize the new design to transform the publication from a black and white newsletter to a full-color magazine. Kelsey holds a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from DePaul University and a Master of Science in Rehabilitation Counseling from the Illinois Institute of Technology. She is a certified rehabilitation counselor, certified case manager, and licensed clinical professional counselor. Since 2006, Kelsey has been employed at the Chicago Lighthouse, where she works as the intake rehabilitation counselor in the Employment Services Division. So she's not just another pretty face, someone who's been involved with NOAA for a long time and is certainly well qualified to step us through this important discussion tonight. So Kelsey, take it away. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, Kelsey, I want to tell our attendees tonight that throughout the webinar this evening, you can submit questions through the little toolbar that you have on your screen. I'm going to be monitoring those as they come in, and we'll probably take most of those towards the end. But if Kelsey needs to take a breath and is looking for a question, or if I see a particularly good question, I may interject when Kelsey's trying to take a breath. So with that, take it away, Kelsey.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to present here at NOAA's second webinar. Like Mike said, tonight we're going to be talking about stares, smirks, and shoutouts. And this is a presentation that I originally came up with last year at the National Conference in Washington, D.C. I did a session about kind of how to deal with the negative experiences in public and kind of used some of my own experiences and my background as a counselor to address some of those issues. And as I was preparing for that presentation, I kind of envisioned an audience of about 20 whiteheads like myself, and what I found was there was a real interest in not just in adults with albinism attending the session, but a real interest from parents and other family members as well. So I tried to take that presentation and tweak it just a little bit for our webinar tonight so that I can maybe address some of the parents' issues as well as best I can, not being a parent of a child with albinism myself. So Mike kind of already hit on this in his introduction, but I wanted to just tell you a little bit about who I am, who's speaking to you tonight. So like I said, I'm adult with albinism. I've also a NOAA board member. I've been involved with NOAA for a very long time. So a lot of what I'm talking about here tonight is kind of just coming from my own experiences. But I'm also a licensed clinical professional counselor, so I'm kind of drawing from some of the theory behind counseling and psychology as well. I should say that I'm not a child psychologist, so some of what I talk about here is again just kind of from my own experiences. It's not by any means some professional advice. And really, what we're talking about in this presentation is our encounters with strangers. And I think I probably don't really have to give this much explanation. I'm sure that most everybody on the webinar tonight kind of already knows what I'm talking about. But we're talking more about encounters with strangers rather than with acquaintances. I kind of, forgive me, but I kind of refer to these among my friends as the albino encounters. And when I think about these types of situations, as I was thinking about it, I realized that there really are kind of three different types of these situations that we're talking about. The first is are the silent encounters, and these sometimes are the most difficult ones to confront. It's kind of the little stares or points or smirks, unspoken things that you might notice when you're out in public, but you usually can't respond to them without looking like a crazy person. The second being what I call the rudely curious, and again, I don't think this needs much explanation. I think we all probably know what these are. These are the questions and comments that strangers come to us with that may not intend to be hurtful, but that still come across embarrassing or annoying, and sometimes they're humorous. My favorite example of this one is when I was riding on the bus one time. I take public transportation so a lot of my stories come from times I was sitting on the bus or sitting on the train. So my favorite example of a rudely curious encounter was one time I was sitting on the bus reading a book, and like most people with albinism, I was holding the book rather close. I had my nose buried in the book like I do, and this man sitting next to me said, you know, you should really try holding that book a little bit farther away from your face. And I was trying to be polite, and I said, thanks, you know, but I'm good. This is how I read. And he was very, very insistent and just kept going, no, seriously, you could really damage your eyes. You need to hold that book farther away. And so I didn't want to go into this whole explanation of, oh, this, you know, I have low vision, and this is what albinism is, and blah, 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 but it just kept going and going, and it was just a rudely curious encounter with this guy who had nothing but the nicest intentions, but it still was annoying, and it's a funny story that I still tell today. And then the third category that we're looking at are the curiously rude, the more in-your-face encounters, the shouts, comments, or questions that have pretty cruel intentions and really serve only to humiliate. These aren't people who are just curious and want to know why you have white hair. These are the people who yell like, hey, albino, or make rude comments within earshot. And again, I think we all kind of can relate to that and have some examples from our own experiences. So some other kind of examples that I was thinking of these encounters would be the, you know, how did you get hair so white? And these all kind of fall within a number of these different categories that I just talked about. Maybe you should get some better glasses. Are you albino or something? If you have albinism, why don't you have pink eyes? I love that one. Do your parents have hair that color? Maybe if you took off those sunglasses, you'd see better. Or, you know, the classic, like I said, hey, albino, hey, whitey, hey, Casper. Lately, I've been getting a lot of hey, Hollywoods when I wear my sunglasses, which I guess that's not really an insult. I don't know. So, again, this slide just shows some of those examples of the questions and comments that we're all too familiar with. So what I wanted to start talking about was what we in the social sciences kind of refer to as the ABCs, the affect, behavior, and cognition. Affect being how you feel, behavior being what you're actually doing, and cognition, what you're thinking. So as we're looking at how we respond to these negative encounters, we really have to look at the ABCs of our response to that. So when we talk about affect, we're really looking at what emotions do these situations bring about in ourselves. So how do you feel? How do you feel immediately after you have one of these encounters, and later on after it's had some time to sink in? Do you hold on to these emotions for a long time, or do you find that you're able to just kind of let it slide and then eventually laugh about it? And I think it's important to allow yourself time to experience these negative feelings, but don't allow yourself to wallow in them or to let them fester. I mean, it is healthy to experience these different emotional reactions, but to an extent. We all need to be able to find a point where we can let things go and move on. When we talk about behavior, again, we're looking at how you physically respond to these situations. So we're thinking about why do you do these things? Are any of these behaviors problematic or counterproductive? I'll talk in a second about some examples of what that might be. Which of these behaviors can or should you change? And are you modeling positive or negative behaviors for your children? When you have one of these nasty encounters when you're out with your child, how are you behaving to that, and what's your child observing? And then we can talk a little bit about working to change negative behaviors that you do have control over. And then the C in the ABC is cognition. So what are you thinking during and after these situations? Are any of these thoughts irrational or self-defeating? If anybody took a psychology class in college, you might remember learning about Albert Ellis and the rational emotive behavior therapy that he promoted, and that was his big thing, was identifying irrational thoughts, and he had some more colorful language that he used to describe them, but identifying irrational thought patterns and kind of confronting those in ourselves. And also looking at, do you make assumptions in your thought processes? So just finding some ways to acknowledge what you're actually thinking while these things are going on and afterwards. So some examples of emotions that we might feel during one of these encounters would be things like embarrassment, or it might be maybe fear for your safety. You might feel worthlessness, anxiety or stress about it, anger, sadness or depression, exasperation. I mean, those of us who have been dealing with these encounters all our lives, after a while they get pretty tiresome. You might feel kind of helpless or even exposed. I know there have been times where someone was, just really asking me personal questions about why I look the way I do, or why my eyes move the way they do, and you just really kind of feel like you're out on display there. And you might feel embarrassed or protective for those around you. Again, I think this probably especially applies to parents. Examples of some behaviors that that we might exhibit would be avoidance of certain situations. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I hate going to the mall. I love shopping, but I hate going to the mall because it just seems like every time I go to the mall, I have one of these stares, smirks, or shout-outs moments. It's like they were just designed to bring that about in the human race. So as a result of that, sometimes my behavioral response is just to avoid going to the mall whenever I can help it. You might blush or bite your nails. You might cry or tear up. You might fight back. You might kind of respond with aggressive behavior. Some people respond with humor, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. You might kind of slink down and hang your head down. As I said, some people might respond with hostility. You might stare down somebody if they're staring at you or making rude comments to you. You might respond with other negative behaviors, like resorting to drinking or drugs to kind of deal with those feelings, or you might withdraw socially from different things. So I'm going to talk in a little bit about body language and nonverbal communication and some ways that we can replace these negative behaviors with some more positive ones. And lastly, some examples of cognition, of the thoughts that might be going through your head when these things happen. Things like, oh, I'm such a freak, I should never have come here. Now John is going to be embarrassed to go out with me ever again. I don't know if you guys have ever had one of these encounters when you were out, like on a date or out with some new friends, and it is just the worst. It's just so embarrassing. Everyone on the bus heard that guy call me albino. Now they're all staring at me. Why does this happen every time I go to the mall? Like I just mentioned. I wish that loser in the Cubs jacket would stop staring at me already. Or when that lady asked if she could touch my hair, it made me want to scream. So these are just some examples of what kind of thoughts might be running through your head. And I think it's important to be mindful of them and to take some time to really think about what you're actually thinking during and after these encounters. And I'll talk in a little bit about some exercises you can do to kind of write these things down and make note of them. Okay, so we've talked sort of about how we're feeling and behaving and thinking when we have one of these nasty encounters, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some tips and strategies for how to deal with them when these encounters happen, because the reality is that when you're living with albinism, these negative experiences are unavoidable. They don't have to be nightmarish or just totally mortifying, but the chances are that if you're living with albinism, that you're going to encounter a few negative experiences like this in your life. So you have to find a way to productively deal with them. And I'm sure that that a lot of folks on the webinar this evening have kind of found your own ways to deal with them. So I tried to brainstorm as best I could some tips to kind of minimize the impact of negative situations like this. But hopefully at the end, when we get to our questions and discussion, we can, if anyone has other suggestions you want to share, by all means, I welcome that. Sorry if this slide appears a little bit small. So some tips that I noted to kind of minimize the impact of negative situations like this. Top of my list was to talk to a friend or a family member about it. Just don't be afraid to laugh or cry, or just kind of let those emotions out. However you respond to that situation, it's important to kind of have somebody that you can share it with in a way that makes you comfortable. And if you don't, even just having the opportunity to write it down, to write in a journal, or just kind of make note about what happened and how you felt and how you responded can really help. Choosing your battles is important, and I think that's a theme that's going to come up a little bit later on as well. But as we all know, it's important to know when it's worth fighting back and when it just needs to be ignored. Being ready with a comeback can be really effective, especially for younger kids. I think fearlessness can be really powerful, and I'll talk in a little bit about some ways that you or your child can kind of work to brainstorm some comebacks to the frequently asked questions or comments that they encounter. The next one here was some advice that was actually given to me when I was a teenager. I was at a NOAA conference and I was talking to an adult with albinism, and the advice that she gave me is when she told me, when I walk into a room, people are going to look at me. It just happens. When you walk around with white hair, you look the way we do, you are noticeable. So when I walk into a room, people look. And so she said, when people look at me, I want to know that I look my best. So that was some advice that I still kind of carry with me today. And I don't want this to sound like vain or superficial, but I think it's important advice to always look your best when you're in public, to carry yourself with dignity, and to know that you don't need to feel self-conscious about your appearance. And also conveying confidence with your nonverbal communication, which I'm going to talk about in a second, some ways to do that. As I mentioned earlier, just finding a way to let the bad stuff go. Start each day fresh, and don't allow yourself to be governed by past experiences or to form a negative pattern of things. Me avoiding the mall might be a pretty minor thing, but if it was starting to interfere with my life, then that would be a pretty big issue. You don't want to get caught into negative patterns like that. And if you find yourself persistently avoiding certain social situations because they cause you stress, maybe try to gradually work your way up to a more stressful situation, taking it in smaller steps. Don't just force yourself into something that's going to make you uncomfortable. And it's just important to be true to yourself, to find a way that you can accept and be happy with who you are, and to live with these occasional negative encounters as best you can. And standing your ground and not being ruled by fear, again, I think is important for kids when it's appropriate. You don't want to be encouraging your kids to be getting in fights on the playground every day, of course, but to know that you don't have to be ashamed and you don't have to be afraid. Sometimes looking out for your personal safety can be important, and again, when I said that I'm an avid public transportation user, this can really come into play. So just being mindful of your personal safety. If anything makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, there's no reason you should have to stick around and tolerate it. And another thought I had is that sometimes taking like a self-defense class might help you to feel safer and a little bit more confident, to know that you have those skills and you have that strength. So if you have the option to do it and you're interested, why not? It might help you to feel a little bit more comfortable and safe. If you can't immediately leave a situation, again, like sometimes happens when I'm on the bus or on the train, sometimes just being able to distract yourself by reading a book or turning on an iPod can be nice, just so that you don't have to constantly listen to somebody smirking about your white hair behind you or something like that. And of course, you should never be ashamed to seek professional help if feelings of anxiety or depression interfere with your daily life. It can be, having a counselor or a therapist you can talk to can really help to, if these feelings are really becoming problematic or if they're interfering with your day-to-day activities. The next one on here I think is great for adults or for kids. It's finding a healthy outlet like playing music, drawing, or jogging, just sort of finding a niche that you can turn to when you have one of these experiences. And this can help with kids especially, not just in improving your stress release and your self-confidence, but it can also be a great way to make friends and to have some positive social experiences to counteract the negative ones. And I mentioned here finding a NOAA mentor to whom you can vent. That can really make a difference. That's something I was always blessed to have growing up. And it was great because I knew that I had someone that I could talk to who just really got it, who I didn't need to, you know, to explain myself to, who kind of understood where I was coming from. And then lastly here, because I'm kind of a hippie at heart, I put to use negative experiences to inspire acts of compassion and kindness to others. And in a second, I'm going to talk about, you know, how to encourage that in kids as well. So I added a few additional tips for parents. Again, please keeping in mind that I'm not a parent myself. Modeling positive self-advocacy can be really important. Your kids learn how to talk about albinism by watching you. So if you feel it's appropriate to take a moment to educate a stranger who asks, make sure that you're doing it in a positive way, because that's how kids learn. That's how I learned to tell people about albinism, was watching how my parents and my family members dealt with those questions. And whenever it's possible, don't lose your cool in public. It's not always easy sometimes with the questions or comments that we get, but again, I think it's important to set a positive example. And use, as I said, using these experiences to teach empathy and sensitivity to kids can be really important, I think. And as I mentioned again, knowing when to educate and when to walk away is important for yourself, but it's also important to teach that skill for your child. You need to know that you don't need to entertain every stupid question that comes to you from a stranger. You do have the right to just say I'm sorry, I really don't feel like talking to you right now. And also realizing that your child might not always want to talk to you about these experiences. This is where having maybe a NOAA mentor or even another family member or friend that your child can turn to can sometimes help, because I know for myself personally, so it was nice sometimes to be able to talk to my parents about these things, but sometimes I just felt like maybe they didn't get it, or I didn't want to take it to them, so you have to be aware of that. I mentioned a moment ago the importance of having a positive self-image and using nonverbal communication to minimize the negative impact of these situations. So a few examples that I just put here real quickly were being mindful of things like your posture. Are you standing up tall and straight? You have your chin up? I think sometimes I see young people with albinism who just really kind of feel ashamed or depressed, and it really just shows in your posture and your nonverbal communication. You have your head down, your hair is falling in your face, and you really just you really aren't conveying confidence like that. Pulling back your shoulders, stomach in, chest out, things like that just help to show confidence and strength. Eye contact can be really powerful, even though for those of us that have nystagmus, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to accomplish, but eye contact can show that you're aware or that you're paying attention, or it can even be threatening. I mean, when you stare somebody down, if they're staring back at you, sometimes it works. Sometimes I've had people who just go right on staring. And your overall appearance, as I mentioned before, is really can really convey a powerful message. If you're dressing in clothing that's fashionable and flattering, and most importantly that you feel comfortable in, you don't need to feel pressured to wear the latest fashions if it just doesn't feel like you. Take steps to ensure that your hair, makeup, and skin look their best as best they can. And remember to always just be true to yourself. Looking your best is looking your best in a way that makes you feel comfortable. Other gestures like fidgeting and nail biting that we talked about can really send a message. They can either convey strength and confidence, or they can convey that you're nervous or self-conscious. So thinking about little behaviors like that. And again, facial expressions, things like the glare or the evil eye, smiling, scowling, laughing, a look of surprise. All those things are easily done with just your facial expression. And again, the way that you speak, speaking with confidence, using thinking about like the tone, the timing, and the pace of what you're saying, and your choice of words, all of those things, even though that's not exactly nonverbal communication, those can all be part of the message that you're sending out. Okay, so I put together a few exercises, and these are things that I just, some of them are established things, and others I just kind of came up with on my own. And so again, when we're done, if anyone has any other things they want to share, I welcome that. I came up with this diary of significant events as sort of a way, just a general journal entry would do the same thing, but I kind of broke it down this way, having a way that you can write about what preceded the event, what happened before, immediately before this thing occurred, and then what was the actual event, what happened, did the person yell, "Hey, albino," at you, or did somebody ask you if your parents had hair that color? And then what was the aftermath, kind of the immediate aftermath? What happened? Did you get into a fist fight with somebody? Did you break down crying? What happened afterwards? And then breaking it down, as I mentioned earlier, into that affect, behavior, and cognition. So kind of noting your ABCs. How did you feel about the event? What kind of behaviors did you exhibit? And what were you thinking? What thoughts were actually going through your head? So note the good and the bad situations in a diary like this and how you handled them, and that can kind of help you to go back later on after the impact has had a little bit of time to wear off, and to kind of go through and look at and really analyze how did you respond to this, what happened, and how were you feeling and behaving and thinking. I don't know if anybody here is a Saturday Night Live fan, but this slide always makes me think of Stuart Smalley and the daily affirmations. But I put these here because I think they can really help, especially for kids, kids and adults. But keeping a list of some positive affirmations about yourself that you can review when you're feeling depressed or when you've had a particularly bad day, it can be really nice. So the examples here I have are: I'm a good person because, I'm proud of myself because, people like me because, and albinism is beautiful because, and coming up with a few statements to complete those sentences. Or maybe even asking a close friend or a family member what their answers would be. And this is just something nice to have that you can pull up when you get home to sort of give you a little boost when you've had a particularly negative encounter with somebody. All right, this one I think is really important. I call it my elevator story about albinism. So an elevator story is basically your explanation of albinism that is short enough that you could give it to somebody in an elevator ride. So 15, 30 seconds, a short explanation about albinism that you're comfortable with to address these rudely curious encounters. You can be as specific or as vague as you want, and think about how much are you comfortable sharing with strangers in different situations. Some people really like to have the opportunity to educate somebody about albinism and to kind of, set the record straight for them so that they know what albinism is and what it isn't. But some people, really just feel like it's none of their business. So when you come up with your own elevator story, you can kind of incorporate all of those things into it. And it helps you to kind of practice this a little bit so that when you have the encounters, you can just, pull it up off the top of your head. Because as I mentioned earlier, the questions are never going to stop, so you might as well be prepared with your answers so you're not fumbling around. And I should also add that NOAA has some little albinism cards that we make available that have a really short explanation of what albinism is. They have some gorgeous positive exposure pictures of people with albinism on one side, and then on the other side it has a little short explanation about what albinism is, so that if you do get one of the rudely curious questions in public, you don't have to sit there and entertain their questions. You can just give them a card and confidently walk away. This is something that I mentioned a few minutes ago, keeping a comeback bank in sort of a they say, you say format. So as I mentioned, fearlessness can be really powerful, especially for kids. So being prepared with a comeback when somebody gives you an insult or a stupid question can be pretty cool. So I'm blanking on examples, of course, but being able to.
Hey, Kelsey, actually, one of the questions is, can we come up with some specific examples of? Could you give concrete examples of, let's say, appropriate comebacks? That's from Linda. I guess it is the little chart here that Kelsey put up. It depends on what they say. If, for example, someone says, "Where did you get that hair?" If you want to take the humorous approach, you could say, "Well, I got it the same place you did," or "I got it from God." I got it, through the magic of human genomics. That's one that I came up with off the top of my head, and I was hoping I was giving you enough time to think of something, Kelsey.
Yeah, that was the question that I was thinking of too. Is where do you get hair that color? And I'm trying to think. I'm not really the best at coming up with the witty responses to it either. But this can be something cool too with your kids if you want to do a little bit of role playing and kind of practice with them, to come up with some funny comebacks. I think because that can be pretty powerful.
If anybody on the call has some, just write them as questions, and maybe we can come back to them when we get a little bit further in here. One of the common ones that I hear in response, maybe not to a comment, but to a really obnoxious stare. One of the ones that I've heard over and over at NOAA conferences is take a picture, it lasts longer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a classic. I think we were doing that one when I was a kid too. So yeah, we can definitely come back to that because I'm sure some of the other folks attending might have some good ideas here, which I'm more than welcome. It's been a long day and I'm not feeling my wittiest, so I can't come up with anything good at this moment. And so what I had here at the end were just some closing thoughts. I had this quote, and this kind of goes back to something that I said earlier. This was a quote that I found that I think is really important. The positive value of the negative experience comes when it propels an act of change, an act of kindness, or an act of reconstruction. And I think that's something that I encounter at NOAA events a lot, is that again, the negative experiences like this are kind of inevitable, but it's how we choose to respond to them that's really important. And you can use them as something that really motivates you to do good or to be kind to someone else. And I think that that's important. Anything that's beneficial or useful in growth, whenever change is constructive, and that's kind of goes back to like cognitive retraining I mentioned earlier. When you're thinking about your thought processes, think about how you're framing these situations. All right, and these last two slides are something that I used when I did this presentation in Washington, D.C. This picture that we have here is a painting that was actually done by an artist with albinism, and I wish I hadn't lost her name. I've been holding on to this picture since I was probably like 12 years old, and I've long lost the artist's name who did it, but it's a picture of a strawberry patch, and there's probably there's a couple dozen red strawberries and one white one kind of up in the corner. And I always loved this picture. I really was never sure exactly why I liked it, but it was just very poignant, and I thought the imagery there was perfect. So one of the things that I asked the attendees at my session in D.C. to think about when they're looking at this picture was to just think about that statement, we are different. Because we are. Living with albinism, you're noticeable and you're not the norm and you do stand out. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but just kind of to be mindful of that and to know that this is who you are as a person with albinism. You are someone who's different, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And this last one here, I'm sorry if we get sued by Apple, but my brother was kind enough to help me put this one together. The second statement that I asked the attendees in DC to think about was, you are unique. So again, as people with albinism, we're diverse and we're beautiful and we're rare, and we do have our own unique look, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It doesn't mean that we're alone, but we are unique in being who we are. And we're always going to be this way. Albinism isn't going to go away, and just like the reactions that we get from people are never going to go away. So it's up to us to choose how we respond to them and how we use them to either educate or to laugh or to inspire acts of change. So we can turn it over to questions now, if you'd like, Mike. Did we get any good comeback suggestions?
We got a couple of good comeback suggestions. I always tell them, yes, I dump my hair in a bucket of bleach. It's in the humorous area. When they ask me why my hair is white, I just say I was born this way. That I guess is a Lady Gaga. Maybe now you could sing the song. I don't know. When people ask you how did your baby get that hair? I say I got lucky when people I say I got lucky when people say look at the movie star, or why is he wearing those glasses inside? I simply smile. So those were some of the those were actually all of the comebacks that we received. One question related to that is, what are the comeback? Are there any comeback ideas about nystagmus? That's a tough one.
That kind of depends on the context of it too, I think. I remember, for those who were in Washington, D.C., we did kind of a silly gimmick during our opening session where we did the top 10 questions not to ask an adult with albinism at a NOAA conference, and one of my personal favorites on that list was, if I move back and forth, can you see me better? Which yeah, but I think, yeah, the nystagmus one is tricky because it depends on the context. Sometimes it's just an ignorant question, but sometimes I, have been asked by, like, healthcare professionals or something like that why my eyes are moving the way that they do. So, so yeah, that's going to depend a little bit.
One answer, I guess, to the nystagmus is you could simply just say, I see all. Say it very authoritatively and very ominously. I can peer inside your soul. I want to get to some of the questions here, if you don't mind, Kels.
Yeah, go ahead.
One real good question here is it okay as a parent if I don't feel like educating complete strangers in random places? I think you've touched on that a bit, but could you elaborate a little bit on Kels?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really delicate art, and I think it's one that's really important to teach to your kids at an early age, is that you really don't have to entertain every stupid question that comes to you. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes it does feel good to be able to educate someone and to teach them about albinism, but there are certainly days that, you might just not feel like talking about it, and that's certainly okay, as long as, if your child is with you, as long as you're modeling it in a way that, that can be educational to them as well. I think a lot of us do kind of feel that pressure that we want to be able to answer every question. I know I'm kind of guilty of this, where, even when I've had a really long day, or I'm tired, or I'm out with a new friend or something, and the last thing I want to do is to be an advocate for the albinism community, I'll still take the time to, to as politely as I can answer these questions, because God forbid you don't want someone to think that all people with albinism are jerks, and you want to take the opportunity to get the facts out there whenever you can. But there's no reason you should have to feel pressured to answer every question if you're really not feeling like it.
I had a really profound thought there. Okay, I remember what it is. I think it's okay. It's definitely okay to feel that way, and as Kelsey suggested, if you can, gracefully get out of it. One of our long-standing NOAA members put it in perspective to me one time when he mentioned it, and he was kind of blunt about it. I won't be quite as blunt as he was, but when you think about it, someone asking you a question like that is akin to you walking up to someone and asking them something very personal and private about themselves. Like, I don't know, I won't be as graphic as he was, but, what's your cholesterol, something like that. It's really nobody's damn business when it comes down to it. So I think that it's just a matter of regulating your emotions and trying to be polite. But if you don't want to talk about it, that's perfectly understandable and perfectly within your rights to just say that you don't necessarily feel like being an albinism advocate today. There is one snappy comeback to the nystagmus that I have to share. Quote, my subconscious is trying to find anything to look at besides you. Ooh.
I'm writing that one down.
Another one is Homeland Security tells us to be aware of what's going on and report anything suspicious. So I'm looking out for terrorists. Let me scroll back up here and look at a couple of things here.
I was going to share something based on what you were just saying about about kind of feeling pressure to always be an advocate for the albinism community. And like I said, I'm usually the one to try whenever I can to answer the questions and to be polite about it. But there was one day I remember when I was coming home and I had just had this awful day of work and I was so tired and all I wanted to do was get home and put on some slippers and maybe have a glass of wine. And this woman came up to me on the street and about a half block from my apartment, and she said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I ask you a question about your hair?" And so for the people with albinism in the audience, of course, what is the first thing you think when you get a question like that? You know what her next question is going to be, right? So my response was, yes, it's natural, and I started to just brush past her. And then she said, no, actually, I was going to ask you where you got your hair cut. And she was selling gift certificates for some salon, and I was so embarrassed. It made me look like I was just so egocentric, like, oh, you're asking me about my hair, aren't you?
We have a couple of difficult questions here. Why do you think that people, that appear to dislike this condition so much? One questioner expresses the hatred I've experienced goes beyond not just understanding. Why is this tolerated more for people with albinism and it wouldn't be tolerated as much for other disabilities or minority groups? I told you it was tough, Kels.
Yeah, that's a huge question. And I'm not sure I've got a simple answer to it. I mean, I think we can probably all agree that albinism is a pretty misunderstood condition. I don't know if you'd say that there's a lot of stigma attached to it, but it's certainly a condition that's not very well understood or very well accepted by a lot of people in the general public, and some of that is goes back to generations, and some of it we can kind of attribute to modern day depictions of albinism in the media. But I had a friend tell me one time, we were talking about why, kind of along similar lines, we were talking about why it seemed to be acceptable for like the media or for comedians to poke fun at albinism, that it didn't really seem to be the same as maybe poking fun of somebody in a wheelchair or making fun of somebody who was deaf. It seemed to, there seemed to be an exception, like, well, it's okay to make fun of albinism. And my friend said that a lot of people in the general public think of making fun of someone with albinism is like making fun of a unicorn. Like, well, they don't really exist. They're who really knows a person with albinism, honestly. So part of it just has to do with it not being a really common or a really understood condition, and unless you grew up or had a family member with albinism, chances are you've really not had an opportunity to get to know the condition the way that those of us in the albinism community have. So it probably comes back a little bit to just what we were saying about the importance of educating people, and I think that's a real important part of what NOAA's mission is all about, is just helping to get the real story and the real image of albinism out there, so that it is a little bit more accepted, and that the general public doesn't feel like it's okay to look at albinism in a negative way. That's the best answer I can come up with to such a profound question.
I'm going to take a shot at it, if you don't mind, Kels.
Yeah.
I think that it almost goes back to some of the things that we learn as we learn about as kids, that that you got to consider the source of the people that are inflicting this hatred, or are demonstrating such profound narrow-mindedness and such profound ignorance. So as a way of illustrating that, I'm going to tell one of my albino encounter stories, to use Kelsey's term. Maybe about 10 years ago or so, I work in downtown Chicago, and I take a train, mass transit home, and I walk from the train station to my house in a little residential neighborhood. And the route that I take takes me past several bars. And it's a nice summer day. I have a responsible job with the county government in Cook County in the Chicago area. I'm dressed in a business suit. I'm well groomed, and I'm carrying a laptop bag home. And I get about 100 feet past one of these bars, and it's maybe 6:30, quarter to 7 in the evening, and it was like Kelsey says, it's like you're probably on a day where this was really the last thing that I needed, and somebody behind me yells out, "Hey, albino," and automatically I'm transported back to being 15 on the streets where I grew up, and some idiot yells that to me. And as Kelsey talked about earlier, what emotions did you feel? I saw red. I was absolutely, totally, and completely pissed, and I was physically so angry. And the first thought that I had was, I'm going to go turn around and kick that guy's butt. But then I thought about it for a minute, and I said, wait a minute. It's 6:30, something like that. He probably got off work about 3 or 3:30. He's pretty drunk by now. I'm not, that's not going to work. So I just, the way that I calmed myself down on that one was to simply consider the source. It's like, if I almost pity somebody that ignorant and that you have to kind of learn to let it roll off your back. And I think that the source of it is just a part of human nature that is just skeptical or just intolerant of anything that looks different. They just don't get it. Another tough question is, what if a family member, a spouse, for example, may look down on a child with albinism?
Wow, that's another tough question. I guess issues of like a family dynamic like that can be really complicated. I mean, if it's possible to kind of work with that person to maybe explore what the root of those negative views are, I think that can help. But I think that can definitely have a negative impact on a child, especially if they're getting mixed messages from different parents or from different family members. If someone's telling them, you're perfect just the way you are, and albinism isn't a bad thing, and you don't need to be ashamed of it, but then they're getting a mixed message from someone else, that can really be confusing to a child, I think. So maybe working whenever possible with with a family member or a spouse or whoever that maybe has some more negative views on it, to kind of help them to see the real impact that can have on the child, and working to maybe educate them or confront them about it would be the way to go. But that can be very difficult, I admit.
Well, let me take an easy question in between the hard ones here. One person asks about, you had mentioned, Kelsey, know a mentor. How would you go about, how does one go about finding a know a mentor or someone to?
you can use some of the resources that NOAA has available right now, absolutely, using like the Albinism online community or our other social networking communities to maybe reach out to some adults with albinism. And in general, NOAA events, the national conferences, or even the local events like bowl-a-thons can be a great way just to meet other people with albinism, to meet teens or adults with albinism that maybe would be a good mentor for your child. The conferences especially, I think, provide some great opportunities for that. We have things like the Ask a Teen panel and the Ask an Adult with Albinism panel, and you can really get to know some phenomenal people with albinism who who have had some similar experiences and who have found ways of living through them, and and taking a real positive view on their condition. And as I mentioned, that was something that was always really valuable to me, and it was never a formal thing. The mentors and the role models that I met as a kid were just people that I happened to meet at NOAA conferences, or who spoke at different sessions, and I got to know them that way and kind of kept in touch with them. So I think there's a real possibility that a more formal mentoring program might be established in NOAA down the line, which would also be helpful in that
regard. Let's see here. This is an interesting, I'm not sure, I think I'm getting all of these questions, but it seems like sometimes the beginning of the questions is cut off. But I think this one's an interesting one. Is it hard? It is hard to see as a parent the stares and the side comments that my child misses due to the vision. As a parent, I have learned to zone this out, or else it would drive you crazy. It is, that's something that's interesting. I did one of the things for the parents that I have being involved with NOAA for a long time. A lot of people would say about how they they're tired of the stairs, and they everywhere they go, blah 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 blah. Maybe I'm just a little spacey or something, or maybe my eyesight's not that good. I don't really notice it that much. I'll notice it occasionally, but one time when I was a little bit older, I was walking with my sister, and we got a wacky comment from a guy about my albinism, and I turned to my sister. I said, "Well, it's been a while since I got one of those." She says, "Yeah, I noticed the stares have calmed down quite a bit too. They don't really look at you as much as they used to." So I think that one of the things for the parents, I think that this this is the point that I believe is being made here is that maybe you're seeing that those stairs are there, but maybe your kid is not. So maybe it would be easier for you to zone that out a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I probably should have mentioned that as well. It really is kind of a blessing that that albinism, that low vision goes along with albinism, because we really do miss a lot of the stares and smirks. I think I probably only catch a small percentage of them, but I'm fine with that, and I think that you, like Mike said, you'd kind of learn to live with it, and if they happen, that's fine, but since I don't have to see them, I really don't have to get that worked up about them.
One question here, Kelsey, is do you? I know this is a tough one at the end of the presentation, at the end of the questions. Do you have an example of your elevator speech?
Again, I think it's going to depend on the context, and a lot of us you can usually tell by how somebody asks a question, how serious they are, or what kind of a response it merits. But if it's if it's someone who seems genuinely interested, and I have a moment, I think I would just say, if I got the question, are you albino or something? Let's say I would, say, yeah, I have albinism. It's it's a genetic thing, and I've had it all my life, and it's normal to me. And again, maybe having one of the NOAA's albinism cards would be helpful at that point, because it would give them the website and give them a chance to educate themselves about it on their own time. But yeah, it really depends on the context. And the most important thing about your elevator explanation is that it's in your own words. It's something that you feel comfortable with. You don't have to read off the medical textbook definition of albinism. Just explain it to someone how you feel comfortable explaining it.
I'm trying to get through here to see if there is something else we can deal with. We only have really a few minutes left here, if my clock is correct. We only have about another minute or so. You know, I am a low vision person looking at these questions, so bear with me for a second.
I'm going to put my contact information back up on the screen. So my email address is up here, ktompson@albinism.org. If anybody wants to shoot me an email, please feel free.
Oh, this is a real good wrap-up question, but it's a real good one, I think, to end on. As a parent of a child with albinism, when I see a stranger that I think may have albinism, I always want to talk to them, thinking it would be nice to know others, but I don't know how to approach without being rude. Any suggestions? That's a great question. Any thoughts, Kels?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think it's something we can all really relate to. And I think you're going to get different responses from different people depending on how comfortable they are with albinism. Some people are more than happy when they are more than happy to talk to you about it, and others might be a little bit less so. But I think it comes down to how you present it, and we probably don't even realize it, but an example of that is I had a good friend from college. I knew her for several years, and she knew all about albinism, obviously, and she used to work at a retail store in a mall, and a family had come in with a little 5-year-old girl who had albinism, and so my friend said she was really kind of nervous and she didn't know what to do, and so she went up to them and she just said, I'm sorry, I don't want to intrude, but I noticed that your little girl has albinism. And the parents were so delighted, even just to hear that she knew the word albinism and that she wasn't asking one of the typical ignorant questions that we're all used to. Just being able to hear that and to know that this was somebody who who got it a little bit, I think was nice. And then it was great, and she introduced the family to me, and it ended up being a really positive encounter. So I think just how you present it, knowing what you know about the typical questions that you encounter, you can use that as a way to, if you're approaching somebody else, to know how to ask somebody intelligently and sensitively, and to kind of avoid those pitfalls that the rest of us encounter all the time.
One of the goofy little tricks that I use in something like that, and maybe it's because I've gone to a lot of albinism conferences, if I encounter another person with albinism, I might go up to them and say, "Did I meet you at the last NOAA conference?" Sometimes that works. I want to sneak one more question in here because there's a good one here. My child is very young, almost 3 years old, and people do ask questions and comment on her glasses and such. When is the best time to bring up albinism with her? She doesn't feel different. She doesn't feel different from other kids.
Oh, wow. I think that I think it's great to just kind of help your child to be comfortable and to be aware of albinism at an early age, and it doesn't have to be something that you present in a negative way or in a really overly intense way for a kid. I think that the fact that she doesn't feel different and that she's it sounds like she's pretty comfortable and confident in herself right now is a great thing. But just making sure that your children, that they know the word albinism, that they know what that is, and that they realize when it's age appropriate, that that they might do things differently than other kids. They might have to hold things closer than their classmates do, or that they look a little bit different. I think it's important just to kind of to start that education process early, so that it doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't need to have this big epiphany moment when you're a teenager where you suddenly realize that you're different. Or that that you have albinism. It's important to be comfortable with it early, so that your child can kind of carry that confidence with them as they grow up, to know that albinism doesn't have to be something that they are, that they're ashamed of, or that makes them stand out in a negative way. If that answers that question.
Well, I think we're up against our time here. Kelsey, thank you very much for a fantastic talk tonight. I think this has been very helpful. We've got some positive comments coming in already. There will be a number of upcoming webinars in the coming months dealing with such things as skincare, the latest research in albinism. We're going to get into the IEP process later in the year, and a number of really neat webinars that are going to be available. This particular webinar will be available within the next couple of days on YouTube. We will let you all know about that when it's up there, so you can spread the word if you liked what you heard tonight. Again, thank you all very much for attending this evening. Have a good evening. Thanks, everyone.